Everything seemed like just another political day. Until Kash Patel dropped a bombshell. Cameras were rolling, microphones were hot, and the press room went completely silent. "We're not talking speculation anymore," he said, staring directly into the lens. "We have evidence, and Senator Lindsey Graham is going to have to answer for it." Just like that, boom, social media lit up. YouTubers, bloggers, and political junkies everywhere were scrambling. Did Kash Patel just accuse a sitting U.S. senator of a major crime? It wasn't just the statement. It was the tone. Calm, confident, almost like a man who already knew how this would end. And then, on cue, Lindsey Graham responded. And it wasn't pretty. Red-faced and shaking, he fired back with a trembling voice. "This is a political stunt. Nothing more." But the damage was already done. The public wanted answers. Something real was unfolding, not a headline for clicks, not a Twitter spat. This felt deeper. Hook. What did Kash Patel discover? And why was Graham reacting like someone cornered? When Kash Patel walked into the Capitol that morning, he wasn't just another former Trump official visiting D.C. He was a man on a mission, holding a stack of files that would shake the very core of a sitting senator's world. The halls of power had grown used to secrets, whispers, scandals that never saw daylight. But this time, someone had pulled too hard on a thread, and that thread was wrapped tightly around the name Lindsey Graham. Kash had been digging for weeks. At first, it was subtle. An anonymous tip. A strange trail of financial transactions involving a defense contractor. It wasn't just about money, it was about timing. These payments always lined up perfectly with Graham's committee votes. But Patel didn't jump to conclusions. He never does. He knows the game, knows how these people hide behind red tape, legal jargon, and doublespeak. So instead, he watched, he tracked, and most importantly, he waited. The deeper he went, the more troubling things became. It wasn't just money. It was favors, appointments, approvals, subtle nudges of influence that turned into policy shifts. It was a shadowy web that led back to private meetings held in posh DC, restaurants, phone calls from unlisted numbers, and shell companies that looked squeaky clean until you looked at the names on the board. And one name kept popping up. Lindsey Graham. By week 3. Kash Patel had seen enough. What began as a quiet inquiry had grown into a full-blown case file that was beginning to feel criminal. But he also knew what he was walking into. Lindsey Graham wasn't some low-level bureaucrat. He was a seasoned politician, one of the most media-savvy members of Congress, and a man who knew how to spin the narrative before it ever hit the press. If Patel made a move, it had to be calculated and clean. So he did what no one expected. He asked for a private meeting. No press, no grandstanding, just the two of them. Word got around Capitol Hill in under an hour. Graham, though cautious, agreed. After all, he wasn't about to look like he was running from anything. But even his staff noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. The normally polished senator seemed off, his smile a little too tight, his eyes darting a bit too quickly in the hallways. Inside that closed-door meeting, the energy was electric. Patel didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the facts, one after another. Emails, wire transfers, scheduling logs. Graham tried to dismiss them, first with jokes, then with vague denials. But Kash didn't flinch. He knew Graham's type. Charisma and confidence layered over calculated deflection. But deflection doesn't erase evidence. And then came the sentence that cracked Graham's armor. "Senator, I'm giving you the chance to explain this before the public finds out the hard way." That's when Graham's smile dropped. His voice tightened. And for the first time in his career, the unshakable senator lost his cool. He slammed his hand on the table and barked, "You don't know what you're messing with." But the threat didn't scare Patel. If anything, it confirmed he was onto something real. Back outside, rumors of the confrontation began to swirl. Staffers leaked fragments of conversation. One aide claimed they heard Graham shout Patel's name down the hall. Others said he canceled all meetings after that. Kash, for his part, remained stone-faced and silent. He wasn't after drama, he was after answers. And he knew the storm was just beginning. That evening, a curious tweet appeared from an anonymous account tied to congressional leaks. It simply read, One senator's career just hit DEFCON 1. Patel knows. Within minutes, political Twitter was ablaze. Hashtags like #GrahamMeltdown and #Kash started trending. The media didn't know what to report yet, but they could smell blood. And as journalists began digging, old questions about Graham's connections to lobbyists started resurfacing like skeletons no one had buried deep enough. The next day, Patel returned to the Capitol. This time, he wasn't alone. A small legal team accompanied him, quiet professionals carrying sealed folders and encrypted drives. He wasn't bluffing. He was preparing for what could very well become a public investigation. And Graham? He was nowhere to be seen. His office released a vague statement about political attacks and misinformation, but the language lacked its usual punch. It felt shaken. Some insiders speculated Graham might try to bury the story by calling in favors from media contacts. Others believed he'd try to reframe it, turning the spotlight on Patel's ties to Trump, painting the whole thing as political revenge. But none of those tactics could erase the facts Patel had gathered. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the dates. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Patel's name started gaining traction with everyday Americans. People who'd never heard of him were now watching his every move. Veterans groups, whistleblowers, conservative pundits, even a few unlikely voices on the left started saying, if what he's got is legit, this could be the biggest political story of the year. Behind the scenes, Patel was careful. No leaks, no press conferences, just methodical steps. He was consulting with legal analysts, reviewing congressional protocols, and quietly speaking to committee members who'd expressed concern about ethics violations in the past. Not everyone in D.C. was corrupt, and Patel was betting that a few good people still believed in truth over power. The question now wasn't whether Patel had something, it was how far he was willing to take it. Would this remain a quiet disciplinary issue buried under procedural red tape? Or was this the start of a political reckoning that would force powerful names into the light? One thing was certain, Lindsey Graham had underestimated the man sitting across from him in that private room. He thought Kash Patel was just another former official chasing relevance. But what he didn't realize was that Patel had built his entire career on uncovering uncomfortable truths, and he wasn't about to stop now. The Capitol buzzed with tension. Staffers whispered in elevators. Journalists staked out hallway corners. Senators suddenly watched what they said in interviews. And through it all, Patel moved quietly, calmly, like a man who already knew how the story would end. The storm didn't die down, it got louder. By the next morning, cable news networks had picked up the scent. First, it was a side segment. Then a banner headline. Kash Patel challenges Lindsey Graham behind closed doors, one host said. Another chimed in, is Graham in trouble? Sources say he looked visibly shaken after a private meeting. That the speculation was wild, but the silence from Graham's camp made it worse. No interviews, no rebuttals, just vague press releases that sounded more like damage control than leadership. Behind the scenes, Patel wasn't resting. He had anticipated this exact reaction. The media frenzy, the denials, the spin. But he wasn't trying to win the news cycle, he was building a legal case. Quietly and methodically. He wasn't just trying to expose a scandal, he was trying to make it stick, to make it undeniable, unshakable, something that even Washington couldn't bury. As the days passed, insiders began to speak. Whispers turned to testimonies. Patel had started reaching out to former Graham staffers, people who had long since left Washington. Some were bitter, some were scared, but one after another, they started confirming pieces of the puzzle. Travel receipts, emails that were accidentally sent to the wrong inbox, off-the-record conversations that now felt like confessions. It was like watching a dam crack, water slowly seeping through until the whole structure threatened to collapse. One former aide, under anonymity, revealed something Patel hadn't even found yet: a hidden fund that had quietly funneled campaign contributions through a charitable foundation. On paper, it looked like a standard nonprofit, but a closer look revealed bizarre donations from companies with pending military contracts. It was subtle, ingenious, even, but also completely illegal. This wasn't just unethical, it smelled like corruption at the highest level. Patel tightened his grip on the investigation. He wasn't leaking anything, not yet. But now, he had multiple witnesses, paper trails, motive. He wasn't chasing rumors anymore. He was connecting dots, and Lindsey Graham knew it. A week after the first confrontation, Patel received a request another meeting, but this time, not in the capital. A neutral location, no staffers, no aides, just the two of them. Graham wanted to talk, off the record. It was unusual, desperate, even. But Patel accepted. They met in a quiet office, far from the spotlight. No suits, no TIs, just two men on opposite sides of a firestorm. Graham didn't waste time. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. Patel didn't answer with threats. He answered with facts. Page after page of documentation, testimonies, timelines. "This isn't about what I want," Patel said. "It's about what the American people deserve to know." Graham was visibly tense, his face pale, his hands clenched. "You think this is simple?" he said, almost whispering. "You think this town survives if someone like me goes down? You pull that thread too far, and the whole suit unravels." He wasn't just scared for himself, he was scared of what might come next, who might fall next. Because he knew he wasn't the only one with skeletons, Patel didn't flinch. He simply said, "Then maybe the suit deserves to fall apart." Back outside, the tension hit a boiling point. Rumors of the second meeting leaked instantly. Twitter exploded again. Conservative influencers began taking sides. Some backed Graham, calling it a witch hunt. Others backed Patel, praising his courage. But one thing was clear: the public was watching closely. And then it happened. An internal memo from a government ethics board was leaked. It referenced an unnamed senator under preliminary investigation due to irregular financial disclosures and misuse of committee influence. The memo didn't name names, but it didn't have to. Everyone already knew. News broke like a tidal wave. Patel, still silent, became the center of attention. Reporters camped outside his office. Pundits debated his motivations. Was he on a vendetta? Was he doing Trump's bidding? Or was he genuinely exposing something bigger than anyone imagined? In truth, Patel didn't care what they said. He knew the game. He'd seen the media spin stories to protect the powerful before. But this time, the story was too big, too loud. The memo had forced official hands. Congressional committees were now obligated to ask questions, to investigate even if quietly. Graham, for his part, was unraveling. His interviews turned combative. His talking points grew vague. At one point, he even suggested Patel was working for foreign interests. A move that backfired almost immediately. The internet mocked it. "He's losing it," one commentator said. "He went from respected statesman to conspiracy theorist in 5 minutes." Patel, meanwhile, released a short statement. "My only interest is in the truth. I stand by the evidence and trust the American people to judge for themselves." And that's when something incredible happened. Regular Americans, retired vets, small business owners, young conservatives, even a few independents started rallying behind Patel. They saw in him what they wished more officials had: courage, decency, accountability. Hashtags like #WeStandWithCash and #CleanUpTheSwamp began trending. Patel, unintentionally, had become a symbol not just of justice, but of how far one man could go when he refused to play by DC's rules. Behind closed doors, other senators began to sweat. If Graham could be taken down, who was next? Who else had secrets buried under campaign speeches and patriotic slogans? Meanwhile, Patel kept moving forward. The story was still unfolding, but the momentum had shifted. For the first time in a long time, a sitting senator was no longer untouchable, and it was all because someone dared to ask questions and refused to stop until the answers came to light. The world was watching, and Kash Patel knew the hardest part was still ahead. The Capitol felt different now. Something had shifted. Lawmakers walked the halls more quietly. The usual backslaps and casual smiles were replaced by stiff nods and nervous glances. Everyone was waiting, not for confirmation they already knew. Something serious was brewing, but for the hammer to fall. And they didn't know who it would hit next. Inside his office, Kash Patel sat with his legal team and a pair of trusted investigative aides. His desk, once clean, was now a battlefield of documents, printed emails, screenshots, financial disclosures, some heavily redacted, some mysteriously missing. But Patel had more than just paper. He had voices, whistleblowers who had finally decided to speak up. And not just about Lindsey Graham. One of the aides leaned in, pointing at a printout. "This," he said quietly, "links the foundation directly to a third-party lobby group that Graham's office denied any ties to." Patel raised an eyebrow. "That's 2 layers of fraud," he said. "And they thought no one would notice." But Patel noticed. And the deeper he went, the more dangerous the waters became. This wasn't just about Graham anymore. This was about a machine, a network of influence and backdoor deals that stretched beyond party lines. Some of the names that showed up in his findings shocked even him: donors, contractors, even former intelligence officials. Graham was at the center, but he was far from alone. The pressure outside his office was mounting. News channels aired nightly debates, some painting Patel as a hero, others calling him a political assassin. "This is a civil war inside the GOP. One analyst declared. "We've never seen a Trump ally go this far against someone like Lindsey Graham." But it wasn't a war for Patel. It was something more personal, a fight for truth. The kind most politicians avoided because it meant burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. And burn they did. One evening, just before sunset, Patel received an unmarked envelope slid under his office door. Inside, a simple note typed in block font. "You're making enemies who don't forgive." No name, no signature, just a message. A threat cloaked as a warning. Patel stared at it for a moment, then slowly crumpled the paper. He'd seen worse, much worse. And if anything, it meant he was getting closer to something big, something someone really didn't want the public to see. The real twist came days later, when a respected federal judge overseeing a separate ethics review unexpectedly requested to meet Patel off the record. It was rare, nearly unheard of. Patel agreed, curious. They met in a neutral office space just outside D.C., no cameras, no press, just a single recorder for documentation. The judge didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've crossed a line most people are afraid to touch," he said. "And now, you've got a decision to make. Do you want this to be a political firestorm or a legal case that actually sticks?" Patel leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the judge replied, "if you present this wrong, they'll spin it. They'll turn you into the villain. But if you do it right, you'll not only bring the truth to light, you'll bring accountability." Patel understood. This wasn't just about making headlines. It was about making sure justice couldn't be dodged. He had to move carefully, precisely. No leaks, no dramatics, just the cold, hard truth delivered through proper legal channels. Back in the Senate, Graham's demeanor had changed. Gone was the calm, controlled posture. Now, during sessions, he looked rattled, his hands twitching, his voice cracking. During key speeches, reporters noticed, colleagues noticed, his base noticed. And when pressed for answers, all Graham could muster was, "I've done nothing wrong." This is political theater. But his words didn't land the way they used to. Then, in a shocking move, a member of Graham's own staff resigned publicly, citing ethical concerns. Her brief statement hit social media like lightning. "I can no longer in good conscience remain silent or continue supporting a system that hides corruption behind patriotism." The post went viral in under an hour. That's when the dominoes really began to fall. Suddenly, reporters from outside the usual media pool started poking around: independent journalists, watchdog groups, even foreign press. Everyone wanted to know what Kash Patel had found, and more importantly, why it scared Washington so badly. In the following days, Patel filed a formal request for an ethics hearing, backed by his collected evidence and sworn affidavits. It was no longer just an internal probe, it was going to be official, public, on the record, and that terrified Lindsey Graham. During a press scrum outside the Capitol, when asked directly whether he feared being censured or investigated, Graham snapped, "This whole thing is a circus. It's beneath the dignity of this chamber, and it's driven by obsession, not truth." His eyes darted wildly, his face flushed. Reporters stood stunned. It wasn't just a soundbite. It was a man unraveling, and then, it got worse. A source inside the Senate Judiciary Committee leaked an internal memo showing that some of Graham's past votes may have directly benefited companies listed in Patel's findings. The timeline matched Patel's claims. It was no longer theoretical, it was actionable. Patel stayed silent. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to go on TV. The truth was doing all the talking. By the time the weekend rolled in, the hashtag Graham resign was trending nationally. Influencers, former staffers, even a few elected officials began to distance themselves. A shift had begun, not just against one man, but against a whole culture of untouchable power. And yet, for Patel, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about popularity. It was about pulling back the curtain and making sure the public finally saw what was happening behind it. Sunday night, the Capitol was quiet. The storm hadn't passed, it was only gathering. Kash Patel stood by his office window, staring out at the dim city lights. His phone buzzed, but he didn't check it. He already knew what it was: more messages, more media requests, more political chess being played behind closed doors. But Patel wasn't focused on the noise. He was focused on what came next. Earlier that day, he'd received confirmation that the Senate Ethics Committee would be reviewing the materials he submitted, not in a closed-door session, not buried in procedural jargon, a public hearing, a televised one. Suddenly, this wasn't just Patel versus Graham. This was America versus the lie they'd been fed for years. And the American people were ready to listen. Inside Lindsey Graham's camp, panic had fully set in. His advisors scrambled to mount a defense, crafting statements and setting up interviews to try and reclaim the narrative. But nothing worked. Each attempt to defend his record only made the public more suspicious. Old interviews surfaced, inconsistencies popped up, and that once polished image of the seasoned senator from South Carolina began to crack. Badly. Still, Graham wasn't going down quietly. The very next morning, he made an unexpected appearance on a top morning news show. The host, visibly tense, opened the interview by asking about the ethics hearing and Kash Patel's investigation. Graham smiled. But it wasn't a confident smile. It was forced. He leaned in and said, "Let's be clear, this entire circus is about political payback. I've served my country for decades. I don't have time for conspiracy theorists with an axe to grind." It didn't land. The host blinked, then calmly pulled out a folder. "Senator, this document shows a financial trail between your PAC and a defense contractor that received funding directly after your committee vote. Can you explain that?" Graham froze. Millions watched the moment live. His eyes narrowed. His mouth opened, then closed. I wasn't aware of that connection at the time," he stammered. But it was too late. That moment, frozen in time, clipped and shared all over social media, became the symbol of the unraveling. Back in D.C., Patel stayed silent publicly, but behind the scenes, he was meticulous. Every document was double-checked. Every source, verified. He knew they'd come for him to dig through his past, question his motives, twist his words. But that didn't shake him. If anything, it reminded him of why he started this in the first place. Because power without accountability is just corruption with a fancy name. As the ethics hearing approached, Patel made one final move. He personally reached out to the now former Graham staffer who had resigned weeks earlier. Her name was Rachel. She was hesitant at first, nervous, even frightened. But Patel didn't push her. He just asked one question. "Are you ready to tell the truth?" She paused, then nodded. Rachel's sworn affidavit became the centerpiece of the upcoming hearing. It detailed meetings, emails, and conversations where policy decisions were influenced by donors behind closed doors. Her statement painted a picture that no spin could erase, and when paired with Patel's documentation, the story became airtight. The night before the hearing, something unexpected happened. A prominent Republican senator who had previously defended Graham went live on a conservative radio show and said, "I may not agree with everything Kash Patel stands for, but I can't ignore the facts. If what he's saying is true, Lindsey Graham has a lot to answer for." It was a crack in the wall, a big one. The next morning, the hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled the seats. Even members of the public had shown up, waiting in line since dawn just to witness history unfold. Patel walked in calmly, holding a single folder. No entourage, no fanfare, just the truth in his hands. The committee chair opened the floor. Patel was invited to speak first. His voice was steady. "I did not come here to ruin a man's career. I came here to protect the American people from the kind of influence that corrodes democracy. This isn't about left or right. This is about right and wrong." He laid out the facts, one by one, clean, precise, unshakable. Then Rachel took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but as she continued, strength filled her words. "I worked for Senator Graham because I believed in what he stood for, but somewhere along the way, what he stood for changed, and I couldn't be part of that anymore." The room was silent. Not even the press clicked their cameras. By the end of the hearing, the committee announced it would review all the materials and make a decision within a week. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Not because of scandalous headlines or viral clips, but because the truth had been spoken clearly, fearlessly, and with receipts. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Some held signs, others just stood quietly. When Patel walked out, no one screamed, no one chanted. Instead, an older veteran walked up to him, shook his hand, and said, "Thank you for not backing down. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing the job that too many people had abandoned." And as Patel stepped off the Capitol steps, he knew this was just the beginning. Because justice doesn't stop with one name. It follows every trail no matter where it leads.